still some people coming in. Let's start with the introductions. My name is Marion Snively. I'm a Region 2 Wildlife Education and Outreach Specialist. And Burl Dickman, the Region 4 Wildlife Education and Outreach person, will manage the chat. Okay, last but not least, this is Wilson Puryear, and he is working with the Education Outreach Program. This is this year's last presentation in our Winter Wildlife Series on wildlife safety. It's called Living and Recreating Among Bears and Moose in Alaska. Okay, tonight's presenter currently works as a wildlife safety education in Anchorage, and this summer he will return to his field technician position at McNeil River State Game Sanctuary. Wilson grew up in Eagle River, where he returned after obtaining a bachelor's degree in zoology from Colorado State University. Tonight, Wilson will cover what to consider and how to prepare for living in and recreating where wildlife live, focusing primarily on bear and moose safety and how to react in an encounter. If you are interested in signing up to get notifications of other events, please see the link in the chat that Burl will put in there. Okay.
All right, is that my cue?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
turning it over to you, Wilson.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in tonight. I'm looking at the names of people who've joined us. I see some names of folks who I've known for a long time, and some names of folks that I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet. But I want to thank you one and all for tuning in tonight for this really important bear and moose safety talk. My name's Wilson. And kind of like Marion said, I've got a really privileged job here at the Department of Fish and Game, because in the summertime, what I get to do for my work is they fly me out to a remote place over on the other side of Cook Inlet, a place called McNeil River State Game Sanctuary. And I get to live there all summer in a field camp among the world's highest seasonal congregation of brown bears. And every day for my job, I get to take people out to go view bears and look at bears. So as part of my job, I have to know a lot about bear safety and how to behave in bear country and what to do when you encounter a bear. And then in the wintertime, when the snow starts to fall and the bears go off to sleep in their dens, I'm lucky enough to get to come back here to Anchorage and spend all winter going around to schools and talking to students, and also doing community presentations like this, just getting the word out and talking to people about bear and moose safety. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And my goals tonight are many, but my primary goal is just to increase everybody's overall wildlife safety awareness and wildlife safety skills. I want to help people get outside here in Alaska. Alaska is one of the best places, not just in the country, but really in the whole world to live. If you like getting outside in the summertime, going hiking, biking, fishing, camping, it's just important that if we are going to do that, we have to understand that just about anywhere you go in Alaska, it's going to be bear country, going to be moose country. So it's important to know how we can reduce the risks recreating those places with those animals. There's going to be some emphasis tonight, both on critical thinking and on personal responsibility. But also, I want folks to leave tonight kind of with the understanding that we have a lot of power in wildlife encounters. And human beings, we've got a lot of gravitas. And the way that we act or we react in a wildlife encounter can really shape the course of that encounter and how that encounter turns out. But I always like starting my presentations with this photograph. I'm going to apologize for folks who aren't here in the Anchorage area. My talk is a little bit Anchorage centric. I start with this photograph because it just kind of drives home the point to me that here, even in the middle of Anchorage, there's wildlife around us. We've got this photo. It's an aerial photograph showing Campbell Creek, which is a creek that runs right through the middle of Anchorage. And we can see there's all this green space around the creek. So we know that wildlife's going to be hanging out there. There's lots of vegetation, so we know moose are going to be in there browsing on that vegetation. Salmon swim up Campbell Creek in the summertime, so we know that bears are going to be going to that area looking for fish. Based on radio collar data from some of my colleagues, we know that wild animals of all kinds use our creeks and our green belts here in Anchorage to travel about. Animals like coyotes, like lynx, sometimes even wolverines walk up and down Campbell Creek. And you can see in this photo that less than a stone's throw away from that creek, we've got houses, we've got neighborhoods, we've got people's homes. So this picture really kind of brings together and encapsulates for me that Anchorage, or really any community in Alaska, we have this mixing of people habitat and people homes and wildlife habitat and wildlife homes. We're all mixed up together. We're all neighbors. So it's really important to know how to behave around one another, how we can live in harmony. The first groups of animals that I want to talk about today are going to be bears. Those are the animals that I work more with. And Alaska has 3 species of bear. Of course, we have the black bear, or the American black bear, and they're found kind of wherever we can find forests in the state, throughout interior Alaska, south central, southeast Alaska. The second species that we have in Alaska is the brown bear, sometimes called the grizzly. 2 different names for the same type of bear. And they're the most widespread bear found in Alaska. You can find them all the way from the tundra on the Arctic North Slope, all the way down to the temperate rainforest of southeast Alaska. And the third species that I don't have on this slide, of course, is the polar bear, a creature of the Arctic sea ice and of Alaska's north coast. Now, polar bears are not as common as brown or black bears here in the state, and not as many people in Alaska live in polar bear country. So we're not going to talk too much about polar bear safety tonight, but just about anywhere you go on mainland Alaska or in southeast, you got a good chance of bumping into a black bear or a brown bear or potentially both. So those are the animals that I'm going to focus on for the bear portion of this talk tonight. And the first thing that's really important to know how to do is just how to tell a black bear and a brown bear apart, how to be able to identify those animals from one another. And you might think that's really simple because, well, a black bear must be black and a brown bear must be brown. But it isn't always quite that easy. Both those species of bears come in lots of different color patterns. This slide shows a lot of the different color phases that black bears can be found in. In the upper left-hand corner, we've got that typical jet black colored black bear. That's the color that most black bears in Alaska are, but they can also be brown, or sometimes called a cinnamon bear, like in the center there. Black bears can be blonde. In some parts of Alaska, like down near Juneau and Yakutat in southeast Alaska, you can have bears kind of like that one in the upper right-hand corner, where they have this sort of silvery blue coloration. Sometimes that's called a glacier bear. And in some parts of the world, like in coastal British Columbia in some places, you can actually have white black bears. Sometimes that's called a Kermode or a spirit bear. So it just goes to show you that name black bear can be a little bit misleading. Now, brown bears come in lots of different colors too. They can be very blonde. I've seen brown bears so blonde before that they almost looked white, kind of a platinum blonde. Of course, they can be a really deep, rich chocolate brown. You can have reddish colored brown bears. Sometimes you'll see a bear like that one in the center photograph that has very dark underfur with really light tips to its guard hairs, giving it a grizzled appearance. That's where that name grizzly bear comes from. And sometimes you'll see a brown bear like the bear in the bottom right-hand corner that's so dark brown that it almost looks black. Of course, the time of the year can affect the color of a bear's fur. The bears in this slide in the lower left-hand corner, those really reddish-looking bears, that photo was taken in June, but by August of that same year, those bears were more similar in color to the bear in the upper right-hand side, that really deep, rich chocolate brown as they were growing in their new winter coat. Of course, if a bear is wet or if it's dry, is going to affect the color of its coat. So the big takeaway I want you to remember is we shouldn't necessarily be identifying a bear just based on the color of its hair. So if we can't do that, what are some things that we could use? Well, there's a few physical features we could look for. Head shape. In general, if you ever see a bear where if you look from the top of the skull to the tip of the snout, it's going to be one straight line. More than likely, that's going to be a black bear. They usually have that very straight, kind of Roman-nosed facial profile, like the bear there on the left. Whereas if you ever see a bear that has sort of more of what we call a dish-shaped face, concave, looks almost more like a dog's face, where there's a definite stop where the forehead ends and the muzzle begins, like the bear on the right, more than likely that's going to be a brown bear. Now, these are generalities, and I picked 2 specimens here who are really good examples of this. You can have a lot of variation, but in general, black bears have that very straight face, brown bears that dish-shaped face. Now, if you're looking at the whole bear, the body of the bear from the side, if you ever see a bear that's got a really massive hump over its shoulders, that's going to be a brown or a grizzly bear. Those bears do a lot of digging for things like roots and ground squirrels to eat. So these very powerful shoulder muscles and very large scapulas to help power their forelegs while they're digging. Whereas black bears don't have that shoulder hump. They have a very straight back. A lot of times when you look at them in profile, the highest point on their body is actually their hindquarters and their rump. Now, the claws on the 2 species are different as well. Hopefully you're not so close that that's the only way you're making your species determination. But black bears tend to have very short, curved, sharp, sort of C-shaped claws. Very, very good for climbing trees. Whereas brown bears tend to have much longer, straighter, somewhat blunter claws. Again, really good for digging. Black bears, superb tree climbers. Brown bears, excellent excavators. Of course, it's not always the bear that we see. Sometimes we'll see things that bears leave behind, like their tracks. And I'll give you guys a little tracking tip that you can use. You'll always be able to tell what species of bear left a track behind. If you're ever out there walking in the woods and you come across a bear track, of course, a bear track is going to show all 5 toes, unlike the track from members of the dog family or members of the cat family. They'll have all 5 toes touching the ground. And if you ever see a bear track where all 5 toes line up in essentially a straight line, you could take a ruler and draw a straight line through those 5 toes. That's going to be the track from a brown bear or a grizzly bear. And if you ever come across a bear track where the toes are arranged more like the fingers on a human hand, where they're more in an arch, and no matter what you do, you can't draw a straight line through all 5 of those tracks, that's going to be the track of a black bear. So a little tracking tip you can use next time you're out hiking in the woods. Now, to recap, some physical features we can use to differentiate between those 2 species of bear. We can look for the presence or absence of a hump over the shoulders, indicating a brown or grizzly bear. We can look at the claws, those long, straight claws of a brown bear, or those short, curved claws of a black bear. And we can look at the face, whether it's got that straight Roman nose profile of a black bear or that more dish-shaped, concave face of a brown bear. Now, one other thing I'll mention, size can sometimes be a pretty good indicator of what sort of bear you're looking at, but not always. On average, adult brown bears tend to be a lot larger than adult black bears. The average statewide weight for an adult male black bear here in Alaska might be somewhere around 200, 250 pounds. Whereas depending on where you go in the state, the average adult male weight for a brown bear could be 400 to 500 pounds, or in some parts of the state, like out on the Alaska Peninsula or Kodiak Island, you're bumping up into the 800, 900, 1,000 plus pound range. So size can be a little tricky, but if you ever see a truly huge bear, there's a really good chance that it's going to be a brown bear. Now, it doesn't matter if we're talking about brown bears or black bears. For both of those types of animals, the number one thing that they're always thinking about is food. And that makes a lot of sense because bears are what we call omnivores. They're animals that eat both plants and meat. And they're animals that go to sleep in the wintertime and they go sleep in their dens. And when they're sleeping in their dens, they're not eating any food. They're just living off their stored fat reserves. And when they wake up in the springtime, they've got to go out and start eating and eating and eating to put on more fat to be able to get through the next winter. Like I said, bears are omnivores. They eat kind of anything and whatever they want. And this slide shows a lot of the things that bears here in Alaska like to eat. Over there on the left-hand side, we've got some blueberries down below, some devil's club berries up above, which would be inedible for you or me, but bears really like to eat them. In the center there, we've got a bear feeding on some sedge. Bears love to eat newly emerging vegetation in the springtime, sedge, horsetail, dandelions. We all know that bears love to eat fish, especially salmon, and bears, of course, also consume meat. Whether that's meat from animals that they chase and catch themselves, or meat from animals like this moose that die of other causes that the bears then find and scavenge. And now looking at all of these types of natural bear foods, I would wager that many or all of these foods could be found in or near most communities in Alaska. So it makes a lot of sense that bears might be moving through our communities here in Alaska, sort of looking for their natural foods like they always have. The only difference now, of course, being now there's settlement, there's people living there. Something that really drove this point home to me was actually a study done a number of years ago by folks here in the Anchorage office with the department. Dr. Sean Farley and some colleagues in 2012 and 2013 actually went around here in Anchorage and they outfitted a number of bears with satellite tracking collars so we could see where they were going within the city limits. But they also did something pretty clever in this study. They outfitted those collars with small little cameras, kind of like a GoPro. And when we got that data back, we were able to see kind of from a bird's eye view where they were going and what they were doing. Now, I've got some of the footage from that study, and let's take a look at it and see what some of the things bears here in Anchorage were eating. I can narrate for you, sort of tell what's going on. Here we have a black bear eating some dandelions and some horsetail, so getting a lot of that green vegetation in the springtime. Here it is in the fall time eating some of those devil's club berries. Again, inedible for you or me, but a really important fall time food for bears, devil's club. Here it is eating some lupin leaves. Here's a black bear using those really sharp claws to tear apart a rotten log, looking for ants and their grubs. something we don't necessarily think about. Bears eating insects. Here's a brown bear feeding on a moose that got hit by a car. Here's a bear feeding on some gull eggs. A bear that swam out into a pond, dug up some aquatic roots. Here's a bear feeding on some service berries and some crow berries. Any sort of berry. Bears are all about it. Bears love berries. Um, and then, of course, we all know bears love fish. And this is a bear feeding on a fish, probably a salmon. I believe this was in Campbell Creek, again, that creek that runs right through the middle of town. And it just goes to show all of this footage that even right here in the middle of Anchorage, bears are going about kind of their natural daily lives, looking for their natural daily foods. Again, anywhere we're going outside in Alaska, just about, is going to be bear country. And talking about bear country, let's talk a little bit about what we're doing, maybe if we're leaving our communities to go out into quote unquote the wild, to go recreate, do these things we like to do, hiking, biking, fishing, camping. What are some things that we can do to be bear safe and to stay bear aware? And I like showing this photograph to groups because it's a good example of a lot of the proper things to do if you do find yourself sort of face to face in a bear encounter. Now, for some background, this photograph was taken in Denali National Park. And these three folks were up visiting the park from outside of the state, and they were walking along Savage River here when all of a sudden this brown bear sort of emerged from the brush and started to approach them. Now, for a second there, it looked like they were going to turn tail and run away, which is something we'll talk about that we never, ever want to do with bears. We never want to run from bears. But luckily, a park ranger was able to yell out to these people, "Whoa, stop, stand your ground, group up together, raise your hands to look big, make some noise." And you can see that these people did that. And sure enough, not long after this photograph was taken, this bear turned around, went back into the brush. Everybody continued on with their day. It was a great bear encounter. Everybody walked away with all their fingers and toes. Now, some things that these people did properly. First off, they're traveling in a group. We're going to talk about why it's so important to be traveling in groups in bear country. But one of the reasons is for this reason right here. When you are encountering a bear and a bear's approaching you, if you're in a group, everybody can group up together and look like one big animal instead of a bunch of little smaller animals. One thing I might encourage these folks to do, if I were sort of playing the role of armchair quarterback, I might tell everybody to face the same direction, get side by side, what I call shoelace to shoelace, next to each other, so you look as broad as possible in front of that bear and to that bear. And that way everybody can see what's going on as well. We've got a couple people in this photograph turned around. They can't really see what the bear's doing. Now, something else these people are doing good is they've got their hands raised up, making themselves look larger to that bear. It's hard to tell from the photograph, but it kind of looks like they just got them straight up in the air doing the stick them up sort of a thing. What I always like to encourage people to do is in a situation like this where you've encountered a bear and it knows you're there and it's not running away right away, we're wanting to identify ourselves to that bear to let it know that we're human beings. Because most bears, once they realize that what they're seeing are human beings, they're going to take off and go somewhere else. So in the sort of spirit of doing that, I encourage people to put a little bit of motion in their arms, because there's no other animal in the woods that makes motions like this. Now, if we just stick our hands straight up in the air, maybe for a split second, that bear might be thinking, "Oh, is that an animal with some antlers on its head?" So I always tell people, put a little bit of motion in the arms, just to let that bear have no uncertainty that, whoa, this is something different. These are people. But overall, the folks in this photograph did really, really well. And like I said, it was a great bear encounter. Everybody got to walk away just fine. Now, some general rules that we should always be thinking about when we're out in bear country is always being what I call bear aware and being prepared. And some other rules that we should be following. First off, so we want to make a little bit of noise when we're traveling in bear country, especially when we're moving through areas where it's very hard to see. If we're going into thick brush or thick timber, or we're going around the blind corner of a trail, it's important to make a little bit of noise while we're doing that or before we do that. The reason we do that, just like you wouldn't go into somebody's house without knocking on the door to let them know you're coming, by making a little bit of noise, we're letting bears and other wild animals know that we're coming into an area. And most wild animals, they don't want anything to do with people. If they know we're coming, they're going to move out of that area. We're not even going to have an encounter in the first place. Now, some great ways to make noise, just using our human voice. Nothing else in the woods sounds like it. So we can talk loud. We could sing songs. We could tell jokes. We could clap our hands. We could get the bells that hang off our backpack. We could get a soda can, empty it out, fill it up with gravel, give it a shake. Whatever you want to do to make some noise, it's just really important that we're doing that. Again, especially if we're going into these places where it's very hard to see. Something else we should do, if we're out traveling in bear country, it's always a good idea to carry some form of bear deterrent, whether that's bear spray, whether that's a firearm, some sort of deterrent. And it's very important to have it handy. And what I mean by that is having it readily accessible. If it's sitting in the bottom of your backpack and all of a sudden a bear comes upon the scene, it's going to be kind of a stressful situation if you have to take your pack off, dig through all your pack and all your stuff to get your bear spray or your deterrent. So it's a good idea in terms of bear spray. There's all sorts of products that are holsters or belts. Having it slid in an exterior pocket, not a bad idea. But the point I want to make is just make sure you have that deterrent handy and that you're trained in its use and you're comfortable using it, know how to use it, what to do. Now, something else we should be doing, especially again in those areas where it's hard to see, is we want to slow down a little bit, maybe move a little bit more cautiously in those areas. If we just go barging into the brush or around the blind corner of the trail, we're giving animals less chance to react to us, less time. So if we just slow down a little bit, move a little bit more cautiously, make our noise, we're giving animals more time to move out of our way. One thing that's very, very important here in Alaska, especially in bear country, when we're outside, we always want to be traveling in groups for a lot of reasons. Of course, it's more fun to be out with our friends and with our family, but it's a lot safer too. For traveling in a group, just by the nature of being in a group, we're making a lot more noise. And just like the people in that photograph, if we do encounter a bear, we can group up, look like one big animal all together. Also, of course, if one of us gets in some sort of trouble and we need someone to help us, we've got people there who can help us out. Now, Alaska is for dog lovers, and it's really great for us to be able to get our dogs out with us, hiking, biking, camping, doing all these fun things. It's just really important if we're going to take our dogs with us, we got to keep them under control and with us at all times. One of the best ways to do that is keep our dog on a leash. If we're out hiking and we turn our dog loose and it goes running down the trail, well, there's a chance that it might bump into a bear or bump into a moose, and it's going to start doing what dogs do. It's going to start barking at that animal, pestering that animal. It's going to make that wild animal upset. That wild animal might charge after our dog, start chasing our dog. Dog gets scared, comes running back to us. Well, now we've got an angry bear or an angry moose on our hands, where if we had just kept our dog with us on a leash, under control, moving slowly, making some noise, we probably would have never seen that wild animal in the first place. And then finally, bear awareness, which we'll talk about in the next slide, is so important whenever we're traveling in bear country, and we want to use all of our senses to be bear aware. And since we want to use all of our senses, that includes our ears. So I always recommend to folks, take the earbuds out, take the headphones off. It's great to listen to music at home or in your camp, but if you're out hiking or you're biking or you're fishing or you're otherwise traveling in bear country, I always recommend, take those earbuds out so you can hear what's going on around you, and you can also hear if somebody's calling out, trying to get your attention. Now, talking more about bear aware and what that means. Bear awareness essentially is just always looking for clues that maybe a bear has been in the area. So we could use our eyes to look for clues, things like claw marks on a tree, places in the ground where a bear's been digging, maybe fish bones next to a stream, bear scat, always a good sign that a bear's been in the area. And we can look for tracks too. Here's a little pop quiz. We've got a bear track with all 5 toes in a straight line. That's going to be a brown or a grizzly bear track. But we don't only have to use our eyes when we're out there to be bear aware. We can use our other senses too. So if we're walking along and all of a sudden we smell something really rotten, really stinky, kind of a dead animal smell, well, sure enough, that could be a place where off in the trees, maybe an animal died. There could be a bear there feeding on that animal. So we don't want to get closer and investigate the source of that smell. It's a good idea to back out of that area pretty quickly. And be sure to tell anybody as we're walking out, hey, something smells kind of bad down there. There could be a bear. You might want to steer clear. By that same token, we're out walking along and all of a sudden we hear off in the distance a bunch of birds making noise, ravens or magpies. Again, that could be a place where an animal has died. There could be a bear there, so we don't want to get closer to the source of that bird calls. We'd want to leave that area pretty quickly. Now, what should we do if we're out there in bear country and we're doing everything right? We're making noise, we're traveling in a group, but we still come across a bear. Well, one thing I really want to stress is that our behavior, remember, we have a lot of gravitas. Our behavior, it influences the outcome of a bear encounter. And funny things happen when you first see a bear, when you aren't expecting to see one. Your heart rate starts beating a little bit faster. Sometimes you'll start getting a little bit of adrenaline on board. You get that little voice in the back of your head talking about fight or flight and, maybe wanting to run and get out of the situation. It's very, very important whenever you first encounter a bear that you need to stop, stay calm, and assess the situation. Now, one thing we never ever want to do is run from a bear. The reason we don't run from bears, bears are predators. They're animals that chase and catch other animals, and that's hardwired into them to do. And just like dogs, if you come across a strange dog, you know not to run from that dog because it's probably going to chase you. Bears are the same way. They're much faster than people are. They can run up to 35 miles an hour. They can accelerate faster than a racehorse. So they're a lot quicker than us. So in these situations where we see a bear, again, remember, stop, stay calm, and assess the situation. And the thing that's important to realize is whether or not that bear seems to know that we're there. Now, in the case where we come across a bear and it seems like the bear doesn't notice us, doesn't see us, it's a good idea to stop, maybe get our deterrent ready for carrying bear spray, pop the safety off just so we have it ready if we need it. But if that bear doesn't see us, we don't want to start making noise or drawing attention to ourselves. Since it's doing its own thing, the easiest thing for all of us is for us to just back up quickly and quietly out of the situation, go back the way we came. Now, we don't want to turn around and turn our back on that bear because then we can't see what it's doing if the situation develops. But if we back up, keep our eyes on the bear until we're far enough away where we can no longer see the bear, then we can turn around, go a different direction. And again, be sure to tell anybody we bump into, hey, there's a bear down that trail. You might want to watch out. Now, in the case where we bump into a bear and the bear does see us, almost every time when a bear knows that people are there, it's probably going to take off. You're going to get a real good view of the south end of a northbound bear. But every now and then a bear might not take off immediately. And here in the next slides, we'll talk about some reasons why that might be. Now, in a case like that, where you see a bear and the bear sees you, now's the time where we need to be like the people in that photograph, grouping up together with our comrades, raising our hands up, putting a little motion in them, and making some noise. Just talking calmly but firmly to that bear, identifying ourselves as human. Doesn't matter what you say. Hey, bear. Hello, bear. How's the weather? Just using that human voice is identifying us to that bear as something out of the ordinary. Now, things we don't want to do in terms of making noise is we don't want to scream, we don't want to growl, we don't want to roar, we don't want to try to make animal sounds. That's going to be confusing to that bear and could escalate that situation. We want to keep things calm as we can. So calm, low, firm voice. Now, situations where a bear might not take off when it first sees a person, escalating these bear encounters, we identify those into two general broad categories. And it's based not on the type of bear, but on that bear's behavior. It doesn't matter if we're talking about black bears or if we're talking about brown bears. We kind of separate bear encounters into two different categories. And one is what's called a defensive bear encounter. And this is a situation in which we have accidentally or inadvertently come into a bear's space. Bears are animals. They don't defend territories. They don't have a sense of property rights, but they do have a sense of personal space, and they will defend that personal space if something comes too close and gets inside of it. Now, bears that are feeling defensive, they're going to be showing us a lot of behavioral cues that they're upset, that they're stressed out. They might be vocalizing, doing things called huffing, which is just sort of a sounds that bears make when they're getting upset. They could be slapping the ground with their feet. If they're getting really upset, they might be making a popping sound with their teeth, sort of a sound that bears make when they're upset. They could be salivating. They could be drooling. They could be licking their lips. Maybe they're laying their ears back against the back of their head like a dog or a cat that's getting upset. Might be lowering their head down, contemplating maybe making a rush towards us. And they might make a rush towards us, whether that's a rush where they intend to make contact or one where they're rushing forward just to seeing if they can chase us off, maybe scare us away, get us out of the situation. Now, situations where you could come across a bear and sort of inadvertently be in a defensive encounter, surprising a bear at close range. We're not making noise. We're not slowing down. Coming across a mother bear with cubs, or a bear with some other item that it feels it needs to defend. It could be a food source like a carcass, or maybe even bumping into a bear that's feeding on a dumpster, something like that. And we've got this video here that I think is really instructive. And it shows a mother bear with some cubs out at McNeil River, walking along this river, and she's giving us a lot of those classic behavioral signs that she's feeling upset. And get this video started here. You can see this mother with cubs, and there's an adult male who's trying to get out of her way, get into the river. But this mother, she's got her ears back. She is vocalizing. She's got her head down. And as soon as that male bear turns his back, that's when she feels emboldened to make a rush at him. That's why we don't want to turn our backs on bears. You can see it's very quick. She comes over, they jaw a little bit, And once she feels that she's neutralized that threat, that male's not going to come towards her and her cubs, you can see she breaks off that attack and she runs back to get with her cubs and to remove herself from that situation. Now, when it's bear on bear like this, you can see it's not that big of a deal. Obviously, if this was bear on human, that could be a much bigger, deal and a bigger situation. Now, mention that most bear attacks fall into this category, this sort of defensive bear encounter where we surprise a bear, we inadvertently come into its space, and it feels like it has to defend itself to neutralize a threat. Now, the other broad category of bear encounter is what we call a non-defensive encounter. And this is a situation where we see a bear, the bear sees us, but now the bear is coming into our space. And it's doing so not in a stressed manner, but in a calm manner. This is a bear that's approaching us. Ears are up, they're not back. It's probably not vocalizing, it's probably silent, might be looking right at us, doing a deliberate approach, or maybe doing the thing where it's circling around, putting its head down, acting like it's sniffing the flowers, and then looking up at us. There's a number of reasons that we could get in a non-defensive encounter like this. Maybe we're walking along a trail and the bear's walking down the trail, and he just wants to keep walking down the trail, figures that we'll move. It could be a bear that's never seen a human being before. Maybe it's curious. Maybe you're out in a wilderness setting. Could be a young bear that's just left its mother. Those bears are on the bottom of the bear social hierarchy. They get picked on by everybody else. So they're always looking for other animals that they can pick on. And they might be coming over to see if maybe they can test their dominance and push these two-legged creatures around. It could be a bear that's been fed before. It's become food conditioned, come looking for a handout, or potentially, in very, very rare situations, it could be a bear that's coming over with some potential predatory intent, trying to figure out if this two-legged thing might be something it can eat. Again, very, very rare. Non-defensive encounters of bear attacks, very rare in general. But let's talk about that A word, the attack. What we define an attack as would be when a bear makes physical contact with a person. And how you respond in these situations is going to vary depending on whether or not your encounter is a defensive encounter or a non-defensive encounter. So it's very, very important, again, to be able to read that bear's behavior and understand the context and the situation that you found yourself in. Now, for both of these types of encounters, sort of the order of operations is largely the same. First thing you do, defensive bear, non-defensive bear, you stop, stay calm, try to control your heart rate, assess the situation. This bear sees us. In both cases, we're readying that deterrent, pulling the bear spray out, we're taking the safety off in case we need it, we're grouping up. We're using a calm voice. We're raising our hands. We're looking big. We're identifying ourselves as human to that bear. We're not escalating the situation if we can help it. Hey, bear. Whoa, bear. We got in a bad situation here, bear. We're not yelling. We're not screaming. We're watching that bear. We're keeping our eyes on that bear. We're not turning our back. We're not running away. And then in the case of a defensive bear, we have to sort of make up our own minds, just like a bear has its personal space. We have to have our own personal space of comfort. And once a bear breaches that space, then it's time to deploy our deterrent. So in the case of a defensive bear, that would be the time now, once it comes into that space. Now, in the term of a non-defensive bear, this is a bear that's coming into our space casually, slowly. It's not stressed out. We didn't surprise it. We're doing all of these things, but if it continues to approach, even after we've done this, we've grouped up, we've identified ourselves as humans, now it's time to up our game a little bit. We need to be a little bit more assertive, maybe even aggressive with this bear. We don't want to appear timid, like something that it's going to push around. Hey, bear, come on, get out of here. Move away. Go on, get out of here. Kind of upping our game a little bit. And if that bear continues to approach again, once it's breached our personal kind of area of comfort, now it's time to deploy that deterrent. Now, when a bear makes contact with us, again, it's going to depend on what sort of situation we found ourselves in. In these defensive encounters and defensive attacks, this bear is trying to neutralize a threat. We've come into its space. It wants to neutralize this threat. So this is the case where if a bear knocks you to the ground in a defensive encounter, it's time to play dead. We want to lay on our face down on our bellies. We want to protect our vitals on the ground. Clasp our hands behind the back of our neck to protect the back of our neck and our head. We want to spread our legs out like the student in this photograph, slightly wider than shoulder width to give us some stability. And if that bear rolls us over, we want to keep rolling until we're back on our belly. In this case, it's kind of time to weather the storm. In these defensive encounters, defensive attacks, they tend to be very quick. A bear will rush, knock someone down, bat them around, maybe do some quick biting. And once they feel that that threat has been neutralized, they're going to break off that attack and likely leave the area. So it's crucially important, as hard as it sounds in these situations, have to remain silent. You can't flail out, you can't scream, weather the storm, wait for that bear to break off its attack. Now, it's also important to remember that once that bear stops what it's doing, we don't want to jump up right away, because that bear could still be milling around in the area. And if it feels that we're still a threat, we jump up too fast, it could renew its attack. So there's a little bit of a happy medium there with once a bear's broken off its attack, wait a little bit before you jump up. Now, in the case of a predatory attack, this is where a bear came into our space, not acting defensively, very casually. We upped our game and that didn't stop it. This bear makes contact with us, we have to assume in those instances that their bear has predatory intent. And in this case, we need to do everything we can to fight back. We're fighting for our life. Use our fists, use our feet, any sort of improvised weapon that you can. Focus on that bear's eyes, on its nose. Do everything you can to get that bear off of you. Now, just for some review, if we're encountering a defensive bear, a bear that we've come into its space, we want to stop, assess the situation, get our deterrent ready. We're grouping up, using a calm voice, letting that bear know that we're people, we're watching it, we're not running away, turning our back. If that bear comes at us, gets within our personal space of comfort, that's when it's time for us to deploy our deterrent. Now, in the case of the non-defensive bear, same thing, we're stopping, assessing, getting our deterrent ready, using a calm voice, trying not to escalate the situation, identifying ourselves as human. We're not running away, keeping our eyes on the bear. If that bear persists and keeps getting closer and closer, upping our game, getting more assertive. Get out of here, bear. Come on, move it. It gets within our zone of comfort. Now it's time to deploy that deterrent. Now that said, situations where escalate to that point are incredibly rare. And the best way to avoid those situations entirely, again, is to always be bear aware we're outside in Alaska, and to always be prepared and thinking about encountering bears and bear safety. Now, for some of these specific activities that we like to do in Alaska, let's go over some of the things that we can do to make those things a little bit more bear safe. In terms of hiking, we're doing all of the things that we're always doing outside in bear country, making noise, traveling in groups, carrying bear deterrents, keeping our dogs under control with us, letting other people know when we see a bear. But something that's also really important for hiking is we need to be leaving good hiking plans. And what a good hiking plan is something that you tell somebody that's going to let them know where you plan to go, when you plan to go there, when you plan to come back, and who you're going with. A good hiking plan, for instance, would be for me to tell you, hey, I'm thinking of going and hiking Flat Top Mountain tonight. I'm going to leave at 5 o'clock. I should be back at 8. I'm going with my friend Zach. That way you guys know that if I'm not back by 8, you haven't heard from me, you know exactly where I plan to be, and you know somebody else I was with, so you can reach out to some of our friends and say, hey, have you heard from these people? And if not, you know where to send people to come looking for me. Now, in terms of camping, especially if we're tent camping in Alaska, one of the most important things we need to keep in mind is that we don't want what's called attractants in our tent with us. And what attractants are anything that smells good or tastes good to a bear. So that could be things like food, like garbage, but also things like toothpaste, deodorant, perfume, anything with a very strong scent. If we're tent camping in a campground, very good idea to keep those things locked inside of our vehicle or inside of a building. But we're not always camping in a campground in Alaska. Sometimes we're out in the hinterlands. And when so, it's just really important we're not keeping those smelly items in our tent where we sleep. Now, when we're out kind of camping in the backcountry, another thing that's really important to consider is picking a good camping site. And a good camping site is one in which you have a lot of room around you to see. So you can see wild animals from a long distance off, and conversely, they can see your camp from a long distance off and avoid your camp. Places we wouldn't want to camp would be on game trails in the middle of thick brush, along salmon streams when the fish are in, on narrow beaches where animals are going to have to move back and forth and travel and be unable to avoid our camp. We always want to practice leave no trace whenever we're camping out in Alaska. We want to pack out all the stuff that we brought in with us. We don't want to leave our garbage there, bury it or something like that. That's going to attract bears, make that spot really unsafe for the next people who camp there. And when I like to go camping in the backcountry, one thing I like to do is use what's called the triangle method. That means that I'll pick my spot where I'm going to set my tent, where I've got lots of room around me to see, and then I'll walk off a certain distance from that spot. I like to do 100 yards, but that isn't always feasible. Use your best judgment. And that's where I'll do all of my cooking. So all the smells of my food and my cooking aren't associated with the place that I sleep. And then when I'm done cooking, I'll sort of walk the other leg of that triangle, and that's where I'll store my food. When I store my food out in bear country, I like to use what's called a bear-resistant food container. It's a very heavy-duty, either plastic or metal jar or keg. It's very hard for a bear to break into. If I'm camping in the woods, I like to throw that container inside of a dry bag, tie a rope around it, run it up over the limb of a tree 12 or 15 feet off the ground where a bear can't reach it. But here in Alaska, we're not always in the woods. Sometimes we're off in the mountains or on the tundra where there are no trees. And that's where having that bear-resistant container gives me a little bit of peace of mind that even if a bear finds my food, it's probably not going to break in and take my food. Fishing, really popular activity here in Alaska for good reason, but it's one of those activities where we have to be aware that we're at an increased risk of bear encounters because we're looking for fish. Bears are going to be looking for fish. When we go out fishing, practicing all the same rules, traveling in groups, fishing with a buddy, and making noise. I always make more noise than normal when I'm out fishing, especially if I'm going through thick brush to get to my fishing hole, or if I'm standing along a really noisy stream where it's harder than normal to hear. If we've got a fish on the line and we're fighting that fish, and all of a sudden a bear comes onto the scene, it's really important that we don't let that bear come and take that fish off our line and learn to associate anglers with fish. So snap that line, cut that line, or open your bail and give that fish lots of slack so that bear's not going to be attracted to that splashing fish. Also, if we're fishing in a place where there's a bag limit of more than one fish, if we've caught some fish and we want to fish for more, it's really important we're keeping those fish as well as all of our gear pretty close to us, preferably within arm's reach. That way, if a bear shows up on the scene, if I'm fishing and I've got my fish 40 yards up on the bank, bear gets my fish. Again, it's learned to associate anglers with fish. It's probably going to move up and down this river now, trying to bully people out of their catch. It's really dangerous for anglers. It's really dangerous for the bear. So let's keep our stuff close to us. In terms of mountain biking, also trail running, activities that are getting increasingly popular here in Alaska. Another activity we need to understand that since we're going at an increased speed, we're at an increased risk of having some sort of wildlife encounter. And there's going to be less time for us to react if all of a sudden a bear or a moose walks out on the trail in front of us. If we're carrying bear deterrent with us, which we should always be doing biking in bear country, it's important that we're keeping that deterrent attached to us, not to our bike. Things can happen in wildlife encounters and you can get separated from your bike. So you always want to make sure that you have that bear deterrent on your person. We want to avoid places where bears are obviously going to be hanging out, like salmon streams during the middle of the fish run. We can come back to those trails at other times of the year when they're not going to be as high activity points for bears. We're always being bear aware when we're biking, and if I see a lot of bear signs on a trail, I'll turn around, I'll pick another trail. Again, I can come to this one later in the season. Noisemakers on bikes, always a good idea. Could be as simple as bear bells on your handlebars, maybe an air horn, maybe something mounted in the spokes of your bike that makes some noise when your wheels turn. We want to have all of our senses available to us, so no headphones, and we're always riding in groups, being out there with some buddies. Now let's pivot and let's talk about bear safety within our communities and around our homes. Like we saw earlier, bears are coming into our communities looking for their natural foods like they always have. But what can happen is as bears are moving around in our neighborhood looking for natural food, they can come across some of these attractants that we leave out around our homes. And here in Anchorage and a number of communities in Alaska, the number one attractant that we have bear problems with is garbage. It's trash. A lot of stuff that people throw out smells and tastes really good to bears. And what will happen is bears are moving through neighborhoods, smell something good in a garbage can, get in that garbage can, get a food reward, and they realize, hey, this is a lot easier than catching a fish. So they'll start to hang out more and more in neighborhoods, become food conditioned, and it gets very dangerous for the people that live in those neighborhoods. Ultimately is usually very dangerous to that bear. A lot of those bears end up having to be destroyed, which is not something that any of us want. So it really is everybody's responsibility to work together and keep our neighborhoods bear attractant free. Now, in terms of garbage, one of the things that we could do is if we have a family where the garbage truck comes to pick up our garbage, we could be sure that we're not putting that garbage out until the same day it's going to be picked up. Bears move around a lot at night. And if we put our garbage out the night before pickup, there's a good chance a bear is going to sniff it out and find it, get into it. So even if it means getting up just a little bit earlier in the morning, really important that we're putting that garbage out the same day it's going to be picked up. Something else we could do is potentially invest in a bear-resistant trash can. These are trash cans made with heavier duty plastic or metal or locking lids that have been tested and are very, very hard for bears to break into, bear-resistant trash cans. Bears are very clever animals, and they learn really quickly that if they can't get into those trash cans, when they come across them, it's not even worth their time. They'll keep moving on. Now, some other attractants we might not always think about. If we have pet dogs or cats at home, if we like to feed those animals outside, it's really, really important that once our pets are done eating, We got to bring that pet food back inside. Pet food is a huge attractant to bears. They love it more than dogs and cats do. Bird feeders and bird seed, another huge attractant, especially for black bears. If we want to feed birds here in Alaska, it's just really important that we do so in a responsible way and feed them during times of the year when bears should be asleep in their dens. That means the wintertime. And my good rule of thumb is for bird feeders, I don't recommend putting them up until Thanksgiving. I suggest taking them down by April 1st. So we should have taken them down here a few days ago. Now, we've talked about how important it is to keep our garbage secure from bears so they're not able to access it. We talked about fishing. If we're bringing our catch home to process it, it's just really important after we've filleted out that fish, we've got the pieces that we can't keep or don't want to keep, the bones or the head or the guts. We need to dispose of those pieces in a way that's not going to attract bears. Great way to do that, put it in a Ziploc bag, throw it in the freezer. On the day of trash pickup, pull it out of the freezer, throw it in your garbage can, off it goes to the dump, never thawed out, never smelled, never attracted bears. Now, if we keep livestock around our homes, chickens, ducks, goats, things like that, it's just really important also, we got to keep those animals safe from bears. One of the best ways to do that is with an electric fence. Bears hate electric fences. They'll touch their nose to it once, and they'll never come near one ever again. It's a really effective way to keep chickens and other livestock safe. We've got some great links on the Fish and Game website, talk about how to set up an electric fence for bear safety. Now, earlier in this talk, we saw some of the footage from that bear collaring study. We saw some things that bears here in Anchorage were eating, a lot of natural foods. Let's take a look at some of the other footage that that study found. Let's see here. So here we have the collar of a black bear, found a garbage can without a lid. That bear's now learned that garbage cans need food. Here's some black bears that found some garbage bags on the side of the road, a bag of birdseed on the side of a house. Here's a bear licking the grease trap, somebody's barbecue pit after a cookout. It wasn't cleaned out. Here's a beehive without any electric fence around it. Bears love honey. Here's a chicken coop, no electric fence. That bear had a chicken dinner that night. Somebody's dog food that got left outside. Somebody's dog food that was stored inside their garage, but the garage door was open. This is somebody's boat hatch that wasn't cleaned out after a fishing trip. Smelled pretty good to a bear. And somebody's refrigerator. Again, inside of their garage, but the garage door was wide open. So the important takeaway to remember from this video is, yes, we have to store our attractants inside. We've got to store them securely. But yeah, they got to be securely inside. We've got to have our garage door down. We've got to have our shed door closed. Now, real quick, I also want to pivot and talk a little bit about moose safety. I think moose safety is just as, if not more important than bear safety, because moose are active all year round. They don't go to sleep in the wintertime like bears do. We're always going to be around moose. And with moose or any other kind of wild animals, the number one thing that's most important to remember is that we always want to give wild animals plenty of space. We don't want to crowd them, get into their personal space. The way that I always judge that is if I'm ever watching an animal and all of a sudden it stops what it's doing to turn and look at me, maybe I'm a little bit too close. I'm affecting that animal's behavior. I might think about backing up a little bit. Now, based on that sort of rule of thumb, maybe the person who took this photograph was a little too close because you can see all three moose are looking right at them. Now, any time of year, we want to give moose plenty of space, but there's 3 times of year in particular where we want to give them more space than normal. The first time of year is the fall time. That's what we call the rut for moose. That's the breeding season. It's the time of year where the bulls are shedding the velvet off their antlers and they're getting really feisty. They're getting grumpy because this is the time of the year where they want to fight with one another to be able to hang out with the cows. All moose are on edge in the fall time, so we got to give them even more space than normal. Another time is the winter time. Wintertime is really, really hard for moose. Moose are herbivores. They eat things like leaves and pondweed and fireweed in the summertime. But in the wintertime, all that food disappears. Leaves fall off the trees, snow covers the ground, ponds freeze over. So all that moose have available for them to eat is bark off of trees and branches and twigs. None of that is very good food for moose. They're very hungry in the wintertime. And just like you or me, when they're hungry, they get a little bit cranky. They get a little bit grouchy. Something else to consider in winters where we have deep snow. Even though moose have these really long, strong legs, it's hard for them to get around in deep snow. So they'll come into Anchorage or come into our other communities and they'll find our nice plowed streets and plowed sidewalks. They don't want to leave those places because it's such easy walking. So a combination of being hungry and a little bit grumpy and unwilling to move means that we've got to give moose lots of space in the wintertime. The third time of year, of course, we've got to give moose space is the springtime. I think that's one of the more dangerous times of year to be bumping into moose because it's the time of the year where the mother moose are having their calves. We all know how incredibly defensive mother moose are of their calves. They have to be. They got to contend with bears and wolves trying to get their calves. And if a person or a loose dog gets too close to a moose calf, that mother's probably going to attack, thinking that it intends to do harm to her baby. Now, some things that we could look for in moose to let us know that a moose is getting upset. Going to be a few body language cues that we'll talk about. Now, in this picture, this mother moose, she's not upset yet. She's fairly relaxed. We can tell by the way she's holding her ears. They're standing up, maybe swiveling around, listening to noises. The hair on her back is laying flat against her back. But if you ever see a moose go from this to this, you need to understand that now you are in danger. This is becoming a dangerous situation. This moose is very upset. She's starting to pin her ears back against the back and side of her head. She's raising her hackles up, that hair along her neck and along her back, even on her rump, to make herself look bigger. She's stopped what she's doing. She's lowering her head down and she's staring at us. And one thing that we can't see in this photo that I bet this moose was doing, she was probably licking her lips. It's one of the first signs you usually see that a moose is starting to get upset. When they get upset, they start to drool, and the only way they can keep that drool in their mouth is to keep licking their lips. Here are a few other photos of moose that are getting upset. On the right-hand side, we've got a young bull moose. Looks like he injured his leg probably trying to jump over this wrought iron fence. That injury is making him a little bit cranky. He's lowering his ears back, pinning him against the back and side of his head, raising his hair up. And then the moose on the left-hand side, this cow moose, very, very upset, getting ready probably to charge at the person taking the photograph. Got her ears pinned all the way back. She's lowering her head down, raising that hair up. She's getting ready to come and make a rush at that person. And the thing that we need to remember regarding moose, if we're ever seeing any of these body language cues that they're getting upset, just remember moose are, in terms of safety, the opposite of bears. Remember, we never ever run from bears, but we should always run away from moose. Give them plenty of space. Get out of that situation as quick as you can. They aren't predators. They're not going to chase us down and try to catch us. Moose is telling us to get away. Let's get away as fast as we can. Now, some situations we might come across, kind of when we're here in Anchorage or elsewhere in Alaska, if you come across a moose that's standing on a trail or standing on a sidewalk, it can be tempting sometimes to think, well, maybe I could just squeeze by that moose, or maybe I could get some people together and we can all hoot and holler and kind of scare that moose off the trail. It's never a good idea. We're getting into that moose's space. That's the number one thing we don't want to do. If you come across a situation like this, moose on a trail, moose on a sidewalk, we have two options. One, we could turn around and try to find another route, or we can sit and wait for this moose to move off the trail so we can continue on our way. Something else we need to think about that's never a good idea would be feeding moose. This is a picture here in Anchorage of a little boy feeding a bull moose a piece of broccoli on a stick, and this is a bad idea for a number of reasons. One, it's illegal. You can get in big trouble if you're caught feeding moose, but this is also very, very dangerous, both for this little boy, for his neighbors, and also for the moose. This is dangerous for that little boy because moose are big, powerful animals, and they could obviously hurt us really easily without meaning to. In this case, if this moose got scared all of a sudden, turned his head really fast, he'd knock that boy out with his antlers. This is dangerous for this boy's neighbors. Even though he and his family are happy feeding moose, maybe his neighbors aren't interested in feeding moose. And when the day comes that the moose wanders over when the neighbors are coming out to go to their car, he's coming over asking for food and the neighbors don't have anything to give him, that moose might think those neighbors are holding out food on him, and he could get upset and he could attack those neighbors. We've had that happen here in Anchorage. This is also really dangerous for this moose. Moose are ruminants. They're animals that chew a cud, have a four-chambered stomach like cattle, and they have a very sensitive digestive system. If they're being fed things that aren't part of their normal natural diet, it can make their stomachs very, very upset, sometimes can even cause them to die. Now, with that in mind, it's very, very important that even in the wintertime, when we think bears are asleep, we got to keep our garbage secured. We got to keep the lids on our trash cans because moose will get into garbage too. They'll get in there looking for things like cereal grains or vegetable scraps. They also really like eating plastic garbage bags, which is obviously very, very bad for them. They knot up in their stomach. They're unable to pass those. A lot of those moose end up getting very sick. Many of them die. One other thing to consider for moose safety, of course, is driving. Especially in the wintertime when it's dark in the morning, dark in the evenings, hard to see moose. We always got to be looking for moose near roads. If we're the driver or even if we're the passenger, if we see a moose, let the driver know. Something else to keep in mind is if we see a moose near the road, flash our hazard lights. That way we're alerting other drivers around that, hey, there's something we need to slow down and be aware of. We flash our high beams or tap the brake or honk our horn, other drivers aren't necessarily going to know what that means. But hazard lights always indicate something we need to slow down and be aware of. I guess sort of in summary tonight, who do you call when you see a bear or you see a moose? You don't need to call the Ghostbusters, and you don't need to call 911 unless a bear or a moose is actually threatening human life, is actually attacking somebody. In that case, yes, please call 911, get emergency services on the phone. But if you just see maybe a moose in your neighbor's backyard, or you see a bear knocking over trash cans in your neighborhood, folks you ought to call would either be the Department of Fish and Game, which are available Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Or if your situation falls outside of those hours, give the Alaska State Trooper Dispatch a call. The numbers I have on this screen are Anchorage centric and Anchorage specific, but we could put some links in the chat for contact information throughout the state. Something you can always do if you're not, can't get anybody on the line or don't want to pick up the phone, ADF&G, Fish and Game, we've got an online reporting tool right on our website, right on the homepage. That's available 24/7. You can always report wildlife sightings or encounters there. If you are here in Anchorage, here are some good Fish and Game contacts. These are some of our local area biologists, as well as our wildlife information desk down there. If you see a bear or you see a moose, or if you just have any sort of questions, feel free to give those folks a call, and they'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And speaking of questions, we're getting to be that time of the presentation. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in tonight, listening to me talk about bear and moose safety. Takeaways, I want you folks to be able to get outside, do all these fun things in the outdoors, hike, bike, fish, camp, but just do it in a way that's being bear aware, being moose aware, and thinking about bumping into those animals at all times. If we see a bear, remember, we don't run from bears. We want to stop, stay calm, assess the situation. If we see that bear and it doesn't see us, just back up out of that situation, go back the way we came. If that bear does see us, grouping up, we're making noise, we're looking big, we're identifying ourselves as human. If it's a situation where we came into that bear's space, it's a defensive encounter. If that bear starts coming at us, we're going to deploy that deterrent. If it's a case where that bear's coming into our space, non-defensively, we're upping our game. We're getting a little bit more assertive with that bear. In terms of moose, if we bump into a moose, get too close, it's giving us those signs that it's upset, get out of that situation as quick as we can. For any wildlife, just give them plenty of room. Enjoy wildlife through binoculars or through our camera lenses. It's a great way to be a good neighbor.